The Mannequin's Promise. In a quiet little house on the edge of town, where the wind whispered through cracked windows and the floors creaked with memories, lived a girl named Lila Hensley, just 12 years old. Her heart was a heavy thing, burdened by the loss of her mother, Eleanor, who had slipped away a year ago after a long, silent illness that drained the color from her cheeks and the laughter from her voice. The house, once bright with Eleanor's humming and the clatter of her sewing machine, now sat hushed, its walls stained with the echoes of what had been. Lila's father, a wiry man named Thomas, worked long hours at the lumber mill, leaving before dawn and returning after dusk, his footsteps heavy with exhaustion. He loved Lila, but grief had carved a distance between them, a silence neither knew how to bridge. Lila spent her days alone, her small frame curled in a chair by the window or hunched over her sketchbook, pencil scratching out the face she missed so dearly. Her mother's eyes, soft hazel, crinkled at the corners, stared back from the pages, captured in strokes of gray and black. Drawing kept the ache at bay, if only for a little while. Outside, the town of Willow Creek carried on, its narrow streets lined with clapboard houses and sagging porches, its people bound by whispered gossip and the rhythm of ordinary days. But for Lila, time had stopped the moment her mother's breath did. One rainy evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance and rain tapped against the glass, Lila sat in her room, sketching by the flickering light of a lamp. Her pencil traced the curve of Eleanor's smile when a strange sound, like the clatter of hollow wood, cut through the storm's murmur. It came from above, sharp and deliberate, echoing from the attic. Lila paused, her breath catching. The house was old, full of groans and sighs, but this was different, almost alive. Curiosity tugged at her, stronger than fear. She set her sketchbook aside, grabbed the flashlight from her nightstand, and crept toward the narrow staircase at the end of the hall. The attic door creaked as she pushed it open, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of lavender, her mother's scent. The beam of her flashlight danced across forgotten boxes, a rusted bicycle, and a cracked mirror propped against the wall. Then it landed on something that made her heart stutter, an old mannequin standing in the shadows, its painted eyes glinting oddly in the dim light. Its stiff limbs were posed as if reaching for something, or someone, fingers outstretched, head tilted slightly. The wooden figure was weathered, its cream-colored paint chipped at the edges, but those eyes, glossy and unblinking, seemed to follow her. Lila stepped closer, her flashlight trembling in her hand. She recognized it dimly, a relic from her mother's sewing days, when Eleanor would drape fabric over its frame, humming as she pinned and stitched. It had been a fixture in the corner of the living room, a silent partner to her craft, until illness stole her strength and it was banished to the attic. Lila reached out, brushing her fingers against its cold arm. "Just a thing," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. She turned to leave, but as she did, the floorboards creaked behind her, a sound too precise, too near. She spun back, heart pounding, but the mannequin stood unchanged, its wooden face blank. Shaking her head, she hurried downstairs, the attic door thudding shut behind her. The next morning, Lila woke to an unfamiliar warmth, not just the weak sunlight filtering through her curtains, but a smell, rich and comforting, drifting from downstairs. Oatmeal. She stumbled out of bed, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and padded to the kitchen. There, on the worn oak table, sat a bowl of steaming oatmeal, flecked with cinnamon, just the way her mother used to make it. Her father had left hours ago, the house was empty. Beside the bowl lay a note, the paper yellowed but crisp, written in Eleanor's looping handwriting, "Eat, my love, you're too thin." Lila's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she traced the familiar curls of ink. It couldn't be. She'd seen her mother's hand still, her chest rise and fall one last time. Yet here was her voice, etched in pen, alive on the page. She glanced around the kitchen, half expecting to see Eleanor standing by the stove, apron tied around her waist. But there was only silence, and the faint creak of the house settling. She ate the oatmeal slowly, the warmth spreading through her chest, and when she finished, the bowl was empty, the note gone, as if it had never been. Days passed, and the mannequin's presence grew undeniable. Blankets appeared tucked around Lila at night, folded with a care her father's rough hands couldn't muster. Her school bag, usually a mess of crumpled papers, waited by the door each morning, packed neatly with her books and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Once, when nightmares shook her awake, dark dreams of her mother fading into shadow, she heard a soft hum, a lullaby Eleanor used to sing, floating through the air. It came from nowhere and everywhere, wrapping around her like a shawl until sleep pulled her under again. Lila began to watch the mannequin, dragging it downstairs to the living room despite its weight. She'd sit cross-legged on the rug, sketching its rigid form, its painted eyes staring back. "Did you do it?" she'd whisper, half hoping for an answer. Its wooden face never moved, but she felt a warmth she hadn't known since her mother's arms last held her, a quiet, steady presence that filled the hollow spaces grief had carved. She started talking to it, her voice spilling into the silence. She told it about school, where the other kids avoided her, their whispers trailing her like shadows, about the stray cat she'd fed behind the shed, about the way her father's eyes never met hers anymore. The mannequin listened, its stillness a canvas for her words. In Willow Creek, a small town quick to weave rumors, Lila chattered to a mannequin after losing her mother. The townsfolk pitied her, calling her mad, but Lila didn't care. One stormy night, fever struck her hard. In a haze, she saw the mannequin by her bed, its cool hand on her forehead, whispering, "I'll never leave you." By morning, the fever broke, and a tear glistened on the mannequin's cheek. Years passed. Lila grew into a resilient artist, the mannequin her silent guardian. At 16, she found letters in her mother's handwriting, dated after her death, hidden in the attic, promising eternal presence. The townsfolk moved on to new gossip, and her father softened, leaving the house to her. At 20, Lila left for college, returning at 25 as a known artist. She married Daniel, who accepted the mannequin, and they raised Ellie, named for Lila's mother. One night, Lila found the mannequin draping a blanket over Ellie, a note in her mother's script beside it, "She's cold, my love." Lila aged in that house, the mannequin unchanging. As her breath weakened, it stood by her bed. "Mama," she whispered, smiling as a lullaby filled the air. She passed peacefully, and Ellie found her with the mannequin, now bearing 2 tears and a note, "We're together now. Watch over her." Ellie kept the house and its wooden sentinel, a quiet testament to a love beyond death. The townsfolk still whispered, but the story endured, a promise kept in silence.